All right, gentlemen, good to see you again.
See you.
Good,
Howdy.
good to pick your brains. It's good to let your thoughts and ideas refine my thoughts and ideas. And looking forward to this discussion, talking today about chapters 5 and 6 in Adam Grant's excellent book, Think Again. In this chapters, I should say, a little bit more of an explanation or a deep dive into arguments. I found this material to be particularly helpful. And so, what I'd like is to have one of you guys start by unpacking the theme from this section that an argument is not a war, it's a dance, or at least it should be.
Yeah, an argument doesn't necessarily need to have like a winner or a loser. I feel like in a war, it's a very adversarial mindset that is putting people in a position where it's kind of life or death, and it kind of almost makes it personal. Whereas when you are dancing, you are working together to refine your understanding, and you're looking to flow with the other person, and like you're kind of coming together to potentially like work together to evaluate different points of view.
Yeah, and I'm going to hone right in on the word together. And that when I've gotten into arguments in the past where I was sure that I was right, even if I was right, it was much more of a war stance, that there would be a winner, there would be a loser, and the loser would have to live completely in the winner's world, as opposed to if I was honest with myself, what I really wanted was, I want you to come here with me so we can go somewhere better together. And if you treat it like a war, if you go in there and I'm going to launch all my facts and talking points at you, and you're going to just be obliterated and embarrassed, how could I have ever imagined that would result in us getting somewhere better together?
Yeah, using word missiles I feel like in my less mature, as I was growing and becoming a leader and figuring out how that worked, I feel like that is definitely a phase that I have gone through. And the opening quote of this chapter was, "Exhausting someone in argument is not the same as convincing them."
Yeah.
And that was a quote from Tim Kreider. It is one of those things where, like, if people just give up on you, that's like the whole point is to convince somebody, not to exhaust them. Getting your way by convincing somebody is way better than getting your way by exhausting somebody, and just you help them reach apathy in that respect.
Well, not to mention, as soon as they've had a nap and and a salad and and a weekend, they're not exhausted anymore, and you haven't gained anything either.
Yeah. You want to gain that.
Yeah, I also want to note that I'm not, I speak as if I'm past this, but I'm well aware of the fact that it's better as a dance than as a war. But even just this week, I can cite some warlike behavior, on my part, and there's a lot of reflexes and muscle memory built up in working that way.
I agree.
Convince somebody of something.
I think that it is like most things with maturity, even if even when you get past, the childish warlike stuff, you're still going to be exhausted at some points, and you're going to regress or not regress, but kind of use older tools that are less effective. I don't think anybody, I don't think anybody ever gets past it or gets away from it. But we can learn better ways and triggers that say, hey, I'm about to go down a ad hominem attack or or I feel like the argument I'm in, like all I'm doing is just exhausting the other person, and I feel like this is just an endurance exhaustion test, and not a something where we're working together and we're collaborating, and we're I need to steer this into getting an ally out of this.
And I think we need to be intellectually humble enough to realize that we don't have all the good ideas. Even in situations where you are in an argument and you're right, that doesn't mean that you have the complete sum of truth and rightness on your side. There are always going to be things that you could take. There's always going to be a perspective that you maybe haven't had. I thought this chapter did a good job of saying, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, and maybe it's closer to one side than the other. But if you just come in to an argument and this is, and it's black and white, and you can only be one or the other, you're not going to come up with the best solution. Because even if you win the argument, if you take some of the best points from the other side, you'll be better off than where you were at.
I'm reminded in both this discussion and in the chapter of an article that I've gone back to again and again on the internet. I hope somebody keeps paying for this person's web server. It's Dale Emery's article, Resistance as a Resource. And he kind of takes it apart from several different angles, but the reason that people resist, a new idea that you're bringing in a conversation is, there's several really good reasons, and the more you attack them head on like an enemy, the worse you're going to make each of those situations, the stronger you're going to make the resistance. And so it's your job to open up and, I guess, dance with that person and really understand what's going on with them, that something so obvious to you is not immediately resonating.
Yeah. They call out in the debating side of things that this how best to be careful with your attacking beliefs and steer away from having a situation where you are veering away from the argument. If you're starting to go after the person or whatever, steer it back. And a couple times in here, he calls out having a good thing to open up your argument with is to call out specific points in the other person arguments that are good points. And when someone has a good argument, call that out and say, that's a really good argument. And giving that level of charity, and I'm not saying charity I'm bestowing something like that, but giving goodwill and helps other people recognize that, hey, this other person isn't attacking me. There's a lot more common ground. There's we might disagree on solutions, and that complimenting the other person can help them be less defensive, and when they are going to rebut whatever you say. And so it can help keep the argument at a higher level and not have it degrade to more of a primal match or war.
And I would say even going beyond conceding their best points in an argument, if you can listen empathetically and understand where the opposing viewpoints come from, what you can sometimes do is like find the reason behind the reason why they're arguing for that position. Maybe there is, they're somehow emotionally invested in that standpoint, or let's say you're arguing about process change, and what they actually have is some kind of apprehension about change. One of the things I think all of us have dealt with in the past is being the consultants that came in after other consultants, right? And
yeah.
And so a lot of times you're not arguing against, like, the thing you're arguing for is not the heart of the disagreement. It's that there has been some other consultant that came in and made some poor decisions or short-sighted decisions, and so listening,
and they're insulating themselves against that instead.
Right. And so if you can take the time, listen with empathy and say, okay, what are you really concerned about? And then you can start to address like some of those other concerns. Because I think one of the things you have to remember is that as rational as we all think we are, especially as software developers, we're way more emotional. I mean, all humans are more emotional than they want to let on, right? And so if you're in an argument and you can start to understand the perspective of the other person and reassure them what other uncertainty they're feeling, like if you can start to reassure them, like, okay, I can see why this makes you concerned, but here's why it's going to be okay. And you can't do that 100% of the time, but that's
the confidence that we can show up with.
Yeah, right. And that's the idea of it. It's kind of a dance, because like you're not just constantly facing each other. Like you're kind of positioning around each other. Like, okay, well, where are you really at on this? What if we move here? What if we take a different approach? What if we take a hybrid approach?
Mm-hmm. Something that I can offer from my own experience, something I observe in myself when I'm, I guess, on the wrong tone in a conversation like that, is that underlying everything, there's this sense of anxious urgency in me that goes along with a sense of being behind. Like, we are behind on this. What we're disagreeing about is so basic, so obvious to me in this moment that we are wasting our time by having this argument when we should be like 5 steps down the road that way.
Mm-hmm.
And yielding and going with this feeling it's never resulted in success in a conversation like this.
Yeah, being self-aware, or having moments of self-awareness of like, hey, like being in a conversation and being like, okay, where am I at, and what feels like this is repeating other conversations I've had, and what isn't, and how do I pivot to a better spot? I have found over, and I feel like I've done this a lot more increasingly over the last like year and a half. Like, as people are saying stuff that I agree with, I'm like, that's a good point. Or if someone says something in a meeting, it could just be like a throwaway line, calling that out as like, hey, that's a really good point. Let's keep that in mind. And that helps build up other people's confidence. Like, hey, I had a good idea, and maybe they will have another one, or they'll be more free to interject into the conversation because they've been given that shot of dopamine. I feel like that's something that's really, really paid dividends.
Yeah, you can use the classic improv technique of yes and.
Mhm.
Someone has an idea, and you acknowledge it's a good idea. Yes, that's a good idea. And we could also, right, and so instead of trying to present your idea as a competing idea, you start to present your ideas as complementary ideas.
Yeah.
There was an interesting bit in chapter 5 about the number of arguments or facts you bring to the table.
Yes.
And counterintuitively, which I love, that's right in my wheelhouse. Counterintuitively, the more arguments you present, the less likely you are to be successful in winning the other person over. And like, I don't think he used the analogy of antibodies in there, but I thought it made me think of antibodies. You know, that you, as soon as you present two or three, one good, you know, supporting fact, supporting argument, and you're having a conversation. But as soon as you introduce a second or a third, you trigger their self-defenses, their antibodies, and they realize they're being persuaded of something, and so a natural resistance kicks in.
And the more things, like I am really good at thinking up reasons to do things, and I have found that you know, the more things you add onto that pile, the weaker they become, because usually the things that are top of mind are the stronger arguments, and that as soon, like, this just must be human nature, but like as soon as people get into a position where they are like hearing all of the arguments coming at them, all they get down to doing is they just look for a crack in one of the arguments, and then they think, oh well, I've just, you know, chopped that argument in half, or made that one wider, or showed that one's not very strong. That means I win, and I can throw out all of the other arguments.
Right.
Yeah.
You guys think there's a connection between that that concept and the notion of talking past the close in sales, in a sales conversation? You familiar with that?
Unpack that a little bit.
Where as soon as
in that position,
if you're in a sale, you know, and your potential customer has become your customer, they say yes, and then you keep selling because that's what you're already in the mode of doing. You have a good chance of getting them to change their mind back to no. So don't talk past the close. Like as soon as they say yes, shut up.
Yeah, you've done your job. You're not going to make it more solid. Yeah.
Yeah, we can see how those are related though. Like the idea that because normally you lead with your best arguments, and you might be kind of persuading someone. And then if you make a more mediocre point, then that's now top of mind for them.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely saw that in the cover letter section. Was it in here or in the?
Yeah, that was chapter 5. There was the young lady who was perhaps underqualified or different than other applicants for a job, but began the cover letter by saying why, you know, explaining that she's not typical, you know, and doesn't have this, doesn't have that, but what she does have is, you know, this, and that.
And I look for that in everybody that I interview. Like I want to find that kernel that is going to make them think different in that position to potentially do things better, you know, like break out of the standard way of doing things. And hey, why are we doing it this way? I don't know. Let's try something different. And being self-aware, I feel like that is really, really important there. When you know what you don't know, you recognize that you can learn it, and other people can recognize that too. So, yeah. that was a fascinating part, and one that I don't think people put enough work or kind of thought into. Because like what every time I talk to like management at one of the companies I used to work with, like they would all talk about how they wanted really outgoing developers, and they would try and interview for that. But when they would actually hire the developers, they wouldn't hire the people with the entrepreneurial leadership that they claim to want. They would hire the people that are people who will continue to row the boat in the same fashion as the 10 other people that that they're sitting next to. It's kind of interesting.
So it's interesting what the delta between people, what people say they want and what they actually choose.
Yeah, and when you're hiring, that's not a trivial outcome to end up with just that stereotype, and then they bring in like us to kind of change things up, and they're like, well, we just can't find people, and it's like, oh, it sounds like you want something very different in your employees.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that takes us to fandom.
We're going to fandom.
Yeah, let's go to fandom.
Sports fandom. Yes, where you'd rather see bad things happen to the. Wait, there was some interesting thing that kept coming up about terrorism, terrorist groups, where.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like I'd rather have Al Qaeda beat the Yankees because I hate the Yankees more than I hate Al Qaeda.
Yeah, I think it was slightly short of that. It was like the only group they might hate more than their than the rival team is Al Qaeda.
Yeah, and not by miles, by millimeters.
Yeah.
Yeah, sports provides one of the really interesting laboratories, like thought experiment laboratories, for a concept that in other contexts I've heard described as the radical other. Mm-hmm. So the radical other is this idea that we want to oversimplify and put people in boxes, and we want in groups and out groups. And sports, because you literally wear your allegiance on your sleeve or on your shirt or on your hat or whatever, like all of a sudden there is very black and white lines. And the chapter talked about rivalry common around here, Michigan, Ohio State, and you simply can put someone in that box and be like, oh, they are not us. And because there is an us, then there's a them, and they are now the radical other. And so I can vilify everything about them because they are them and we are us. And
yeah, well, I mean, it's often as a non-sports ball, an aficionado, it's often pretty obvious to me, like how sports is a societal heat sink for our tribal aggression, so that we're not always going to war. Like that we get to play that out in sports instead, in relative peace.
Yeah, I have long thought that as a U of M fan, a lot of sections in here hit home to me. But I did feel like I trusted this book more because I now know that Adam is a U of M fan. So
he's one of your people.
He's one of my people.
Read this book and he was an Ohio State alum. You just put it down and walked away because
trash.
Put it down. But I'd walk out to my fire pit.
Yeah, because Kindle goes along with it.
He's now the other, and there can clearly be no common ground.
Obviously,
it is interesting, and believe me, I'm as guilty as anyone. As a Bears fan, anyone that's a Packers fan is clearly the radical other, and there's no
dividing the listening audience right now.
Yeah, no. And But one of the things that's interesting in situations where you're dispassionate, you can step back and you're like, actually, these two people that have formed these in and out groups in some other circumstance would otherwise get along really well. Like they have so much in common. Like you have, Brock, is it Toledo that's like right on the line between Ohio State, Michigan? Right. You have people in Toledo that are both huge football fans, enjoy sports in general, very similar temperaments, but for a fluke of where public educational institutions are, right, they don't like each other. Like, yes, but you should be friends. Like, you could really get along. You have so much in common.
No thanks.
Well, and also, not to make this too political, but it is on topic, is that there's, currently there's a situation where the Speaker of the House has just had her home broken into and her husband assaulted and hospitalized.
Yeah.
Right. But there are people on members of the other party that are delighting in this publicly.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like it's definitely not, we're beyond sports here. We're beyond, but it's definitely a higher degree of the same idea.
Yeah, this is definitely the people have picked teams.
Right. Yeah, it is one of the huge problems we see in American politics, in our society in general. Like, it's one thing when it's sports, when there's a radical other, but when you make the radical other of your fellow countrymen, and all of a sudden, like, you've decided there's nothing redeeming about them, we end up in some really dark places.
Right. Yeah. Well, and crossing that line into violence is that's clearly a different place than we've been. Yeah. Unless the person, the Ohio State person falls down and he gets a compound fracture, like Brock was talking about earlier.
Okay. But yeah, there's some. I wish we had another half hour to dive into other aspects of this chapter. The KKK section was. I've heard that story many times, and it's a master class in getting people to think differently and to change people's opinions, and to in situations where you could easily other people, to bring them around and say, hey, we're all just people here.
Yeah, you might even say that the TLDR on this whole venture is, when you find yourself in a conversation with somebody that you disagree with or you have a different point of view with, open things up and be curious, as we discussed before.
Yeah, finding common ground. Being curious about where you agree. Being curious about where your values are the same, where your perspectives are the same.
Yep, it's easy to find common ground if you look at values.
Absolutely. Seems like a good place to wrap up.
I disagree.
Well, stay curious.
I'm curious about why you think.
I can't remember what we were going to add on to the what we added on last time, but I like to stay curious.
Be curious and brush thrice daily.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was something about attack people or something like that.
What?
I thought it had something to do with attacking people.
How about we just be curious about finding common ground?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good.
Be curious about what unites.
This one. Woo! See ya.